we go.
Well, Dr. Mestenhauser, we've had a chance to talk about the field itself of internationalization, and specifically the fragmentation of knowledge. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about that and the nature of leadership within the field, too.
Yes, I think that the information about the world comes from all over the place. It's hitting us right and left. The problem is that the liberal and general education is well organized in sequences, supposed to be from elementary, introductory to more advanced to advanced, but that's not how we gain the information, and that's not what the students do in taking courses. Somebody studied that, I cannot remember the source of that anymore too, but they discovered that the students take the freshman students take senior courses, and it doesn't do well in it, and it doesn't make any difference if they have the background courses for it too. So we are not really organized the way that the theory of liberal and general education provides. And the other problem is that you have each discipline is fragmented. It's not just many disciplines, like you study history from Jesus Christ to St. Augustine, and then you proceed, by decades or 2 decades or 3 decades only. And you don't see it, because the students pick and choose. And so it's not integrated knowledge as such. And then if you study history of World War II, for example, or at least parts of that too, you would not understand the nature of communism, for example,
Right.
and the nature of the Soviet Union. You would not understand also the shift that happened when the Soviet Union disintegrated. And that was amazing to me, because no faculty people from international studies have ever anticipated the fall, the disintegration of the Soviet Union. After it happened, they all wrote explaining what happened as if they knew it all along, but they never have to. And yet you see they had millions of dollars of grants to study the Soviet Union, but they bought into a paradigm that did not exist, because the Soviet Union was a house of cards, and it was not understood. I realized that when I came to Kyrgyzstan, for example. There was a country that was being Sovietized and Russified even before the Bolshevik Revolution and so on. And yet it was a country where people retained their native culture, and it's amazing survival of culture. That cultural anthropologists would be delighted to study as the survival of the culture. So that's the difficulty with the integration of knowledge, because you need to put these different pieces together somehow, and make them connect in your mind. Now, the other difficulty with that is that the people in other countries have the same problem. And we don't know exactly, for example, how the Germans teach international studies. And if we did, we might be surprised how they study it. I think that my own examples relate more to the Japanese. Why is it that to this date Japan has never accepted responsibility for the aggression of World War II? They apologize for the way they treated Korean women and things like that. And so no wonder, Koreans didn't think that that was enough and thoughtful enough and meaningful enough as an apology. So the integration is not just the knowledge; it's also how the knowledge relates to people. Because people absorb that knowledge, and they act on that knowledge.
There's one other question I wanted to ask you. As we talk about kind of the fragmentation of knowledge, we've got it both within country-specific contexts. We see it within the disciplines too, but as a field itself, we've talked about how internationalization is split almost between two camps, and it's got a long history that I think we can talk about at length some other time. I'm wondering if you can talk about that sort of split within this particular field of knowledge.
You know, the split is sort of between the humanists and the business-minded, kind of competitiveness-oriented people. That's a pretty deep split.
Mm-hmm.
And there's probably a number of people in between, like myself, who understand that competitiveness is part of our lives. You know, we compete with another institution, we compete for grades in school and things like that, so you cannot ignore completely. But what I always object is the overemphasis on that competitiveness out here and the underestimation that what the international education could produce. Because people are killing each other all around the world, you know.
Yeah.
What are we doing as international education to help? You know, I know that some of the people started going to Sri Lanka during the civil war there too, and they actually managed to lessen some of the severity of the war.
Right.
International education might not prevent wars, but I think after the wars is when it's most important. You know, I think again the Sri Lankan neglected to use that opportunity. You know, but I think when we had even during the Cold War, for example, when we had the East-West exchanges going and so on, they were essentially directed to this kind of thing. And one of my most favorite examples of how well this has worked out was with a prominent Soviet historian by the name of Alexander what is his name? Yakovlev. I don't know if you know that name or not. He was a member of the presidium of the party.
Oh, okay.
And he was the first one who came on the East-West exchanges.
Really?
And was assigned to Columbia University, and they treated him very nicely, gave him an office and open access to the library and everything else. And he had a roommate, American roommate. So the roommate then eventually wrote a major article about Yakovlev, about how he has undergone a change of mind, complete paradigm that lasted for a little while, but it was a direct result of his study in New York. So his Soviet orientation, communist orientation, was that he wanted to study conditions for the takeover of the communism. And he used Roosevelt as an example.
Oh my gosh! Okay.
As a person who showed that there was a progressive movement, which was the beginning of the way to the socialism, you see. And then eventually he came, you know, all excited to the office and talked to this roommate, and he says, "But Roosevelt didn't betray his class." You know, the thinking. And the seed again was planted in his mind, because the whole Soviet ideology was based on that it was our fault, and we needed to become in the communism sort of this what is it called, Pax Sovietica, you know, for the whole world to. Now he didn't make that shift automatically and immediately. When he returned, he wrote 5 books, all of them vitriolic about the U.S. But then eventually he connected with Gorbachev when he studied not Marx, Engels. And he found some obscure footnote in his writings, which indicated that communism may be an ideology also, which was then subject to change. But previous to that, of course, it wasn't. You know, was part of the base, the economic base.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that opened up a fantastic new opportunity for him.
Mm-hmm.
But the Presidium didn't like him, so they shipped him to Canada as the ambassador. But what happened is that Gorbachev picked up on that.
Yeah.
And actually stay in touch and visited Canada quite often, incognito at times too. And they in fact discovered that this communism is changing as well, that the way they look at capitalism is antique, that capitalism itself has changed, that there are many forms of it to begin with.
Right.
And that the Soviet Union must take responsibility for the events. And the rest of it is history.
Yeah.
And the problem was that we never understood that. We continued to believe that this was just a shift and strategy and that they haven't really changed, that they are just changing a strategy and that they are still continuing the same line, which is too bad, because if we had understood that, I think that the events today may have been quite different. So, that certainly has influenced international education. I visited Russia a number of times, and one time I did have the pleasure and the honor to meet kind of a big breakfast with him in my hotel room. He died recently, shortly after I visited him, and he repeated that, and was kind of sad that we have not learned from the fallout of the Soviet Union. And he said, we made so many mistakes with the Pax Sovietica. Don't make the same mistake with the Pax Americana.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, many people still don't believe it, because this debate that we are having now about American exceptionalism is really troublesome, because exceptionalism means, first of all, that you cannot be compared if you are exceptional.
No, you're right.
And secondly, is that it really focuses on yourself and as being better than other people. And I don't think anybody really wants to hear that sort of thing.
Right.
There is a new book out by a Britisher whose name escapes me now, but it's called The Myth of American Exceptionalism.
Yeah, yeah.
And it should be read, because he is the biggest friend the U.S. has. And he's turning now against us because of this excessive flag waving and the conviction that we are somehow exceptional and therefore different from other people.
Yeah.
That makes that sort of fits into the cleavage, that you mentioned too, because most people understand that if you want anything, you would have to make an appeal to the people who believe in the competitiveness and the exceptionalism.
Right. So I mean, this seems in some ways coming back to even that the knowledge is culture bound, and ethnocentrism and the danger of that, the fragmentary nature of knowledge.
That shows again, what I think Dick Brislin came up with in 1950. In which he said that why do we have international education? Because we are ethnocentric.
Yeah.
And that ethnocentrism then was the antecedent of international education as it developed today.
Yeah.
And it is, because I think everything you see in the strategies of intercultural communication and so on. But unfortunately, some disciplines like the international studies never got that message.
Right. They're still,
somebody from Harvard actually studied the profession and concluded that it's very parochial. That they study about culture that they have never visited.
Right.
That most of them don't even have passports to travel abroad.
Which is perfect.
So much for international studies,
Exactly.
and yet they are historically the foundation of international education.
The basis of this. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Mestenhauser.
Okay.